to the world. Subscribe now to the Hot 97 YouTube channel. It's Ebro in the Morning with Laura Stiles and Rosenberg.
It's Ebro in the Morning. Laura Stiles is on an assignment. Yo, we got Rosenberg here. And give it up for my guy, Mike Muse, one time. What's up, Mike? How are you?
Yo, what up, Ebro? What up, Peter? How are you guys?
Good, man. What up?
Thank you for joining us. Mike Muse is a part of a new movement called Vote Quadrant. Before we get into that and how we're working with Vote Quadrant to get the vote out and get people out to vote, because now that we're beyond the Jersey and New York primaries, now it's all about November, so we're heating up for that. Mike, tell them, I met you when you were working for the Democratic National Committee, I believe, right? Who were you working for?
Yeah, we met around that time, bro. So I served on President Obama's National Finance Committee for both of his terms. Yep. And then I also served on the Democratic National Committee for both of his terms as well. And then I served on the Inauguration Finance Committee for both inaugurations. So we met during that time period, brother. So it was really great to be in conversation with you. Just thank you guys for having me.
No problem.
I'm so proud of you, brother. And I appreciate the platform that you're giving me and others to have a voice in this political discourse.
Yeah, no, we have leaned in here probably, since before 2016, we've been doing, at least these conversations and trying to do the work, our part of the work to, share information. So you were on the front lines a little bit with the Democrats. What is the tone right now amongst the Democrats? What's the vibe in those circles with regard to where things are going in November?
Yeah, I think the most important thing to recognize is that you can't take anything for granted. You can't take fundraising for granted. You can't take votes for granted. You can't take polls for what their word are and what they're worth. You can't get comfortable with any lead that the polls may be suggesting. I think the realization that the Democratic Party learned from 2016 that nothing is guaranteed and nothing is assured. Nobody is entitled to anything, right? And so I think that the Democratic Party is recognizing that they have to go out and fight. They have to go out and do the work. But in particular, I think everyone from every industry is really trying to figure out, what does that look like, right? What does campaigning look like? How do you make sure you have every touch point when we're existing in this virtual-based world and this new virtual-based reality? And so I actually think that it's more of an advantage for the political process, because when you're doing traditional campaigning, what we call the retail politics, right, where you see the candidates shaking hands and kissing the babies, kind of where that model came from, it's difficult to be in so many places at one time. But now in the virtual digital space, there's so many different types of touch points you can have by having national town halls, by having virtual town halls that really target specifically groups, right? And then we start leaning into Ebro with the identity politics, right? So start leaning into targeted groups where you can engage in a discourse, right? Where they can ask you questions, you can answer them, and it isn't like this safeguarded gatekeeper way. And so I think that's really the tone of America. I think the tone of America, Ebro, doesn't want these Manchurian candidates anymore. Right? They don't want the candidates with the perfectly coiffed hair, the perfectly tailored suit or skirt. They want their candidates to be more real, more authentic. We want to know their personal constitution, because then we would know how they're going to vote once they get into office and how they will mandate. And so I think that is the overall 30,000 foot perspective of like how the view of the national landscape
is. And you think the Democrats, but you think the Democrats understand this right now?
I think so, that Democrats do understand that they need to fight for every vote. Like, you can't take anything for granted. Just because, if you look at the battleground states, just because Vice President Biden is ahead by a large margin in those states, that is no guarantee. Anything can happen between now and November on election day. Elections change sometimes within a week, 2 weeks out prior to election. And so we don't know what event will happen. We don't know what will occur to that time period. And so it's important that the Democrats recognize that, and they create the strategies they need to do to ensure that they get every vote that they need.
Well, and furthermore, with Joe Biden, people love to point at his mistakes, his gaffes, his mistakes on camera. Does that play a part in any of the conversations that you hear? Because now you're with Vote Quadrant, so you're actively engaged with a system that teaches us how to vote strategically to end police brutality. You're working, the Vote Quadrant focuses on 4 municipal offices, mayor, district attorney, police chief, and judges. And before we get into the detail of that, you're actively hearing and dealing with potential voters. Are they concerned about what people often point to with Joe Biden are either his gaffes or his history?
Of course. I think also, too, how I started out the conversation by saying that because we're in this virtual reality world and because we're in this digital space, that goes to the availability of data. That goes to availability of information that's now on the internet. So people have a better chance now to research everyone's record. People have a better chance to dig into the crates, if you will, right, to really understand how they voted, why they voted, and make the comments that they said. And so now people are at home, and so now people have more time to concentrate and really do more of a deep dive in ways that they haven't been able to do previously because they're working, because they're raising kids, because the kids have extracurricular activities. So people have time more to do deep dives into these issues. And so, yes, Joe Biden's record is a complicated record when it comes to the Black community. And I think that the campaign recognizes that. And I think I want to be very clear, I'm not part of the campaign. And so I think that the campaign recognizes that and they have to deal with that. In my conversations I have with the Mike Muse show on SiriusXM, I often engage with callers all the time who have questions about, the national candidates, who have questions about the presidential candidate, and they really want to know how is it going to impact them on their day-to-day lives, right? And so, yes, these are questions that the electorate absolutely is having, and rightfully so. I also, too, believe that the candidates have to be mindful of not to be defensive, right? And not to feel offended when they get asked a question about.
You think Joe Biden got offended a couple of times?
Yeah, I think a lot of candidates do, Ebro, just because I think what's interesting, what we're seeing, Ebro, is that I wouldn't say for the first time, but we're actively seeing people be engaged in our political discourse in ways that we haven't seen before. We're starting to see people feel comfortable challenging candidates. We're starting to see people comfortable asking candidates questions. They're not as stylized as possibly a journalist would ask a question, right? They come from an authentic place. It's sincere. It gets right through the BS, right through the talking points to get to the answers. And I don't think candidates are used to that, right? I don't think the candidates are used to fielding such strategic questions from the general public. And so I think it puts them off guard, right? Because candidates do have a certain camaraderie with journalists over the years, right? If you've been a candidate in office for at least 20 years, you have a camaraderie with the media. You have a camaraderie with the journalists, right? And so you anticipate some of the get you gotcha questions that they may ask, but you don't anticipate the questions from the public. And I think sometimes it's a posturing that throws them off guard. You see their body language change, right? I think they have to kind of get used to that.
How you focus, obviously, Mike, on local elections, and we talked about that, judges, et cetera. But how important is the winner of the general election in November with regard to sort of all the other levels that exist in government?
Oh, it's extremely important. Thank you guys for this conversation, and thank you for that question. I think now we're kind of getting into the nuance of political discourse. I think we're getting into the nuance of how politics works, which is why it's really important for me to create the Vote Quadrant system, because oftentimes we don't really look at it's okay to be a single issue voter. It's okay to really focus on one thing that you're passionate about. I often tell people all the time who have questions about who do I vote for, Mike? What do I do? And I asked them a question. I said, what do you care about the most? Tell me the one issue you care about. And then they may say healthcare. And I say, okay, well, find out what the candidates are doing, saying, and what they're proposing around healthcare and make a determination according to what that is. And so as you begin to look at the national level, I'm focused on the local level, but as you begin to look at the national level, there is a whole plethora of issues that are affecting our nation, from immigration to taxes, to the environment, to environmental justice, right? To education, to criminal justice. What the federal government can do around criminal justice reform is different than what they can do on the local level, right? So there is a distinction between the federal, the state, and the local level, right? That's why you see the challenge in the Congress right now, where the House of Representatives passed their police reform bill, but it seems to be done on arrival within the Republican aspect of the party, within the Senate that's controlled by the Republicans, to which the president said he would veto the bill before it even gets to his desk, right? And so what can be done on the federal level? They can do different things like form police commissions, they can ban chokeholds. So there's certain things that they can do within the federal government, but there's more things and actions that can be done on the local level that can have an impact on what people care about the most when it comes to police brutality and police accountability, holding police accountable for the action they've done for killing of Black people, right? Those things exist within a quadrant to which I created, which is the mayor, the police chief, the district attorney, and the judge. Oftentimes, Ebro and Rosenberg, we focus on the presidential. Oftentimes, we tell people to vote, and I think it's very important to vote. I want everyone to vote for all of the ballot. Everyone who's on the ballot, I want you to vote for that position. I want you to be thoughtful about that position too as well. But the answer has always been, well, vote for the senator. Well, voting for the United States Senator doesn't solve the issue of bringing the police into the courtroom, right? Voting for the U.S. House of Representatives does not convene a grand jury in order to bring that police officer to trial, right? And so the vote quadrant is also a civic education aspect on it about strategic voting. So if these are things you care about, it's time that we really focus on the local level, because for far too long, we've been looking at the federal government, but the federal government is a 4-year, 8-year, 10-year, 20 years out from able to have real meaningful change to what the unrest on the streets is about. People are protesting on these streets across the nation for police accountability, for police reform. The way to do that quickly, swiftly, without accountability is the vote quadrant system.
I love it. Now we talk a lot about city council here. We've had city council members on. We try to cover off on that, as well as Brooklyn District Attorney, Queens DA, borough presidents. We delve into a lot of local politics, fortunately, on this program. And I think over the last several years, it's become more popular to understand what you were just talking about, Mike Muse, with regard to even at the district attorney level. I mean, we're talking about Cy Vance in Manhattan and who's going to replace him because he's been in there 20 years, or there was a heated battle with Melinda Katz over in Queens, or even having Gonzalez on from Brooklyn. So, I do believe that there is a move in that direction. If people want to engage with you further around this conversation on social media, how do they do so?
Yeah, definitely. Hit me up at I am Mike Muse, MUSE on Twitter and Instagram. You can also go to votequadrant.com. When you go to votequadrant.com, I explain each square, ladies and gentlemen, of what the mayor does in terms of appointing a police chief and a police commissioner. And then I ask you that if you are looking at a mayoral candidate, you need to ask them questions about how, as if they are the police chief, as if they are the police commissioner, and say, does a police officer need to be of the community? Does a police officer need to be from the community? What type of entrance exams needs to be changed to make sure we get to cultural competencies and make sure we get to the psychological aspect of it? I really talk about the educational aspect from a district attorney in terms of their convening power of a grand jury, but also, Ebro, I talk about how a district attorney doesn't have to bring cases to trial. They can say, I don't want to even bring that case to trial. I think that individual should have some type of other social services. And then the final part is I talk about judicial candidacies. For far too often, we allow these judicial candidates to go unquestioned. They're not allowed to have town halls or chats at the coffee rooms, or we never see judicial candidates coming to our churches and to our barbershops, to our colleges and universities. But we really fail to realize just how important a judge is in terms of controlling the temperament of a courtroom, allowing evidence to be admitted. But most importantly, Ebro, the thing that we don't talk about is the deliberation instructions they give to the jury. Those instructions could be extremely biased in terms of how a case should be decided. But then not only the sentencing aspect of it, and the judge actually goes beyond criminal justice reform. Police brutality, they go into overall criminal justice reform. The judge can say to break up families or not to break up families, right? To give a Black boy or Black girl a second chance, and to see a Black boy and a Black girl as 11 years old, because for far too often, Black boys and Black girls are seen as adults, even as if they're a juvenile, and then they're sentenced as such. So we need judges who have an understanding of personal constitution institution and lived experience to recognize our young folk as young children, to assign the right sentencing and or not to be sentenced into the criminal justice system, period. And so that really is what the Vote Quadrant system is. It's a strategic voting method, a strategic voting system, as well as a civic educational tool. And I think that's why it's taken off the way that it has taken off, is because we haven't had an understanding specifically of how those 4 units can get the change that we want and is a solution to where we see the unrest in the streets. So it takes away from the federal government. Far too often we focus too much on federal government. Far too often we focus too much on the senator, on the president, on the vice president. All are important. But if you want this specific issue to change in your city, your neighborhood, this is it. Really quickly before I close, I know you want to go, Ebro, is that the Minneapolis County prosecutor, Mike Freeman, he was elected in 1990. He had no interest in charging the officers involved in the George Floyd case. He made a statement, and I quote, he said, "There is evidence that actually clears them of any wrongdoing. So I don't see where we need to try these individuals." That's where the state governor had to step in and then appoint the state attorney general, who was elected, who had already signified that he had saw enough evidence that they should at least be tried. And
same thing's happening in Kentucky right now with the Breonna Taylor case.
Exactly. That's why Vote Quadrant is so important. This is why Vote Quadrant matters, because you can see, and then, Ebro, we can even take it to Atlanta. You looked at, Mayor Keisha Bottoms, right? Mayor Keisha Bottoms was very lock in step with the police chief and her sentencing of how she valued Black lives, right? How she valued making sure that changes were done in Atlanta. As soon as we saw those police officers manhandling those college students from Stone and Morehouse, immediately you saw a dismissal of those Atlanta police officers. Then you see an action with Rayshard at the individual who was murdered got 2 shots was back in the Wendy's parking lot. You saw that county prosecutor, that district attorney, he came out swiftly with charges against a police officer. You know how rare that is to have such charges swiftly done, if at all?
That's right.
That's because Atlanta voted for a district attorney who cares about Black people. That's because Atlanta voted for a mayor who cares about Black people, who made sure that she was locking up with her police chief to say, no, changes need to be made. We still don't know the reason why that current police chief stepped down, but I guarantee you her and Mayor Bottoms had some strong conversation on what the future of that police force really
it's even happening right here in New York State with Tish James going at the NYPD right now. Even that's on the state level, but the state attorney general, Tish James, has a 57-page report that she put out about sweeping changes that she expects, and she's given that to Governor Cuomo that they expect with the NYPD.
Exactly. Another elected official, attorney general, who has the ability to bring cases to trial. Attorney General Tish James, who I love, is the equivalency of a state attorney general of Minnesota, Keith Ellis, right? So in essence, if the district attorney of Cy Vance, who currently is a Manhattan district attorney, was not to bring forward a case of police brutality, police misconduct, then a Governor Cuomo could then appoint a state attorney general, Tish James, to then actually investigate the trial and see if any indictments or charges should be brought forward. This is why the local matters. We spend a lot of time on the federal government, as we should, for taxes, healthcare, immigration, all the things, right? But if we really, really, truly care, this really marries the heartbeat. When these individuals are protesting in Soho and in Beverly Hills, right? The youth are upset, they're angry, and they're tired of that same rhetoric from Manchurian Candidate, which I mentioned earlier, and they want results. We keep telling them to vote for the senator, but we don't see anything changing on the local level because we keep doing the same thing, saying the same strategies, expecting a different result. And we all know the definition of what that is. What this is saying is breaking up that narrative and that ideology and saying we have the power within the local level to actually vote this individual to ensure police accountability. We have examples in Atlanta. We have examples of it in Minnesota. And I think those are really great examples to use. That's why I think Vote Quadrant is so important. I think that's why people have really taken off with this and really, the partnerships I'm engaging with are just incredible. I never thought it would have happened. Ebro, this comes not because I decided I want to start a 501c9 nonprofit a year ago. This was birthed from the op-ed that I was writing for Level Magazine, which is in partnership with Medium. I'm the lead political contributor. And my op-ed was due around us discovering Ahmaud Arbery's death. And I said to myself, I don't like being on soapboxes. I think you can kind of tell now by the direction and the tone. I don't like traditional political discourse. I said, I don't want to write another think piece about another Black man dying at the hands of the police under hashtag, we have to start another protest. I said, something has to be done to advance this conversation to a solution. And then within a certain amount of time, I brainstormed with myself to create this system of the quadrant. Once I released it, it took off and it amplified. And then it made me realize, Ebro, you asked me questions about what are my listeners and callers when I go around the country, what they're hearing. The reason why they are so attracted to it, they're like, yo, I didn't even realize that. Yo, I didn't even know the mayor appoints a police chief. Yo, I didn't even know the DA could not even bring forward the charge. Yo, I didn't even know a judge had that much authority. You know what, Mike? I got to be honest. I never even looked into the judges. I go in the ballot box and just vote random. This is kind of like this refreshing. It's almost you give individuals a glass of water who've been dehydrated for so long because we've been focused on the wrong type of political discourse when it comes to police brutality, right? And police accountability. And I think this is why Vote Quadrant, go to votequadrant.com, has really been so impactful and people are really getting engaged behind it. And I'm super, super excited for it because finally it's a solution and it's finally something that we can see actionable come November. We don't have to wait 10 years for a study.
And you said votequadrant.org.
.com.
Votequadrant.com. Mike Muse. Also, you can follow Mike Muse. What's your Instagram account, man?
Yo, at I am Mike Muse, M-U-S as in Sam E.
Well, we're going to be having you back on, bro, because as we get closer to November and digging into the details, we got a lot of stuff to talk about. And we appreciate your partnership with Hot 97, too. So we're going to be covering
I'm excited,
a lot.
man. I can't wait.
Thank you, man.
Yo, Mike Muse, thank you so much for your time, bro.
All right, peace, Mike.
Thank you, fellas. Appreciate you.
Peace.